I wanted to start this lecture by giving a definition of creativity. Just to let you know, there are lots of different definitions of creativity, so this is by no means the only one, but it is a definition, which I think sometimes it's helpful to start with what a developmental domain means and what it's referring to. So creativity, one idea, and Sternberg, if you see in the parentheses, Sternberg is one of the authors of this definition, has done a lot of work in the area of creativity, is fairly well regarded within this developmental domain, but it is the ability to produce work that is original, so work that has not been produced by anybody else before, but it needs to fit within particular tasks or domain constraints. So it can't just be some necessarily random idea or random work that has nothing to do with the topic at hand or the medium that someone's asked you to work in. So it needs to be related to the task or the problem that people are trying to solve. So it's an original or creative way of navigating a particular task or challenge. I don't know how many of you have ever played Scattergories, but it is a fun game, and I'm going to give you an opportunity on the next slide to play a little bit of the game. So you're going to need to find somebody at your house, hopefully, that you can play with while you're doing this. But Scattergories is a game that actually uses elements of creativity, so I would like you to follow the instructions on the next slide and play a round of Scattergories, and then after you have finished playing the round, come back to the slides, come back to slide 6, and then we can talk more about what those elements of creativity are. So as I said on the previous slide, these are the directions for the Scattergories game. Obviously, we're not going to be playing the whole game. You're just going to be playing a couple of rounds, but I think once you've had the opportunity to play a round or two of Scattergories, when we talk about the different elements of creativity and how they relate to the game, it will make a lot more sense, and those elements will be a lot more clear about what we're referring to. Many years ago, my family was playing Scattergories, and one of the prompts was states. Most of us gave the name of a U.S. state that started with a C. C as in cat. My husband answered with a state of being. He gave the answer calm. His answer was original because he was able to think flexibly. You may not know this, but Vygotsky actually did write about and think about imagination and creativity, so I wanted to share a little bit about this portion of his theory with you. So Vygotsky talked about the fact that there are two types of cognitive behaviors or thinking behaviors. So he talked about the fact that we can reproduce things or we can use our imagination to create things. So a reproduction is when you copy something. So if somebody exhibited a movement and then you copied it, imitated it, did the same movement exactly, that would be a reproduction. If you saw a painting that someone had created and then you tried to recreate the same painting, that would be another example of reproduction. Imagination, this is when you use your imagination to create something new and different. So you go outside, you look at a tree, and you draw your rendition of that tree. You use your imagination to recreate that tree using some sort of media, paint or pastels or tissue paper, whatever it is that you use to create that new and different image. So that would be using your imagination to create something that's not exactly like you've seen before. Maybe you're referencing things that you've seen before, but you're not trying to recreate something exactly. So Vygotsky determined that there are 4 laws of using this imaginative or creative cognitive type of behavior. So it's a little confusing because the first law actually has the next 3 laws underneath it. But the first law is that when we have imagination, when we can think outside of the box, when we can visualize things in our minds, when we can think about things that we haven't seen or heard before, that when we can use our imagination, that fuels the production of creative products. So imagination is the driving force behind creativity. So it's really important to let children have opportunities to develop their imagination if we want there to be creativity. Vygotsky was really into dramatic play. If you think about it, dramatic play is the epitome of imagination, because you're imagining a scenario that's not actually happening, that's not actually taking place. And then you're using your creativity to bring it to fruition. So Vygotsky also noted that this imagination has to come from somewhere, that imagination doesn't just appear in a vacuum. We have to have experiences, and we have to have information coming in for us to be able to utilize imagination. So this is where the second, third, and fourth laws come into place. They're about where we get that imaginative fuel. And then once we have that imaginative fuel, then we can create things that are original and unique and creative. So the second law is that one source of imagination is personal life experience. So the things that we have personally experienced and done and read about and seen, those lend themselves to fueling our imagination. Sometimes our imagination is fueled by other people's life experiences. So when people tell us stories about when they were a child or what life used to be like, when we read books about somebody else's experience, this is also something that can fuel our imagination. And then finally, we can utilize emotions and emotional experience. So if you've ever been outside in a thunderstorm and you heard lightning and it felt scary, when you tap into that scared feeling and then you use that to go and create a picture of those emotions that you felt, that's another thing that can fuel our imagination and our creativity. The final piece that Vygotsky talked about is that this is a circular product or process. So when I have experiences that stoke my imagination, and then I create things that are creative, and then creating things fuels my imagination even more, and then that heightened imagination lends itself to even more creative endeavors and products, it's just something that keeps circling around. So imagination fuels creativity, and creativity fuels imagination. So it is a process that continues to go around and around, because the two play off of each other. I would also encourage you on this slide to take a look at the article. It's a good one. It helps to explain Vygotsky's ideas about creativity in a little bit more detail. Another theory that's relevant to the topic of creativity is Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. So in the 80s, there was a professor of education who realized that when we're thinking about intelligence, that just looking at people's reading, writing, and math scores is far too narrow a definition of what it means to be intelligent, and also realized that creativity is an important part of measuring intelligence, that we don't just want to measure whether someone's able to reproduce something, whether they're able to engage in the process of reproduction, but we also want to see if they're able to engage in the process of creativity or creating something original using imagination. And so what Gardner did is he took this notion of, hey, we need to be a little bit more broad-based than traditional measures of intelligence. We need to add in endeavors that are creative in nature, that may produce things that are more original in nature, and we need to think about intelligence in that way. So he proposed the idea that there are 8, and then later added a 9th type of intelligence, to really think about all the potential that humans have, all the ways in which humans can both reproduce and use imagination and come up with creative products, and that we can use these dimensions and these products that we're looking at to gauge people's intelligence in different kinds of arenas. So I would encourage you to take a look at the graphic on the next slide, which will show you the intelligences that Gardner has proposed. So as noted when we were talking about Gardner, there is a notion that creativity and intelligence are connected in at least some way to each other, although there isn't complete agreement about what that relationship exactly looks like. So in terms of the majority of scholars, there is at least some consensus that creativity is a subset of IQ, so that IQ is more broadly measured, and for Gardner it would be measured in those different domains, and then creativity is a subset of that, so that you don't have to be creative to necessarily be smart, but it is a piece of that. So when we're thinking about IQ, generally creativity is not necessarily measured. So when we think about the Stanford-Binet IQ test, it measures things that are more traditional when we think about intelligence. So it measures things like short-term memory, how good you are at analytic thinking, like problem-solving kinds of things, your mathematical abilities, your spatial recognition. And then there are generally separate tests that measure creativity. So the Torrance test of creative thinking, or the TTCT, is a very popular, very well-known creativity test. So it is getting at some things that the Stanford-Binet IQ test does not get at. So it's looking at creative potential in those areas that we were talking about earlier. When we think about those elements of creativity, the Torrance test of creative thinking is really trying to get at how fluent are your thoughts, how flexible are your thoughts, how original are they, are you able to engage in elaboration. So I'm going to show you on the next slide some examples of questions that are used on traditional IQ tests versus the Torrance test of creative thinking. On this slide, there are two TED Talks that help you understand the creative skills and abilities of young children. Each TED Talk is about 13-14 minutes, but they're both very helpful in helping us to understand just how creative young children are and sort of what we should be looking for when we're thinking about the early childhood period. The little quiz on this page is something that you should learn by watching the second YouTube video on the slide, the one by George Land, so the second TED Talk. But just in general, outside of those TED Talks, which again will give you a lot more information about this, we know that generally creativity increases with age, although there are some scholars who find that there are slumps in childhood and adolescence. There's some literature on the 4th grade slump to show that in early childhood, children tend to be fairly creative, and then it kind of dips down, and then it goes back up, and then it dips down, and then it goes back up. So we seem to have some developmental periods where we are more creative and developmental periods where we are less creative. This depends on a lot of things. It depends on how creativity is measured. If you think about young children, they believe that everything they've created is novel because they just don't know a lot about the world. Whereas when we get older, we realize that many of our ideas have been seen and heard and done before, and that they're not necessarily as creative as we thought that they were. So there are two ways of thinking about creativity. There is convergent thinking and divergent thinking. So convergent thinking is, can you take kind of disparate elements and ideas and bring them together into one creative answer? Or can you have a problem and then branch out and think of a whole bunch of different solutions to it? So the first one, where you take random bits of information and you put them together in some sort of coherent package or answer, that would be convergent thinking. If you have a problem and then you come up with lots of different solutions for how to solve it, that would be divergent thinking. So when creativity tests measure divergent thinking, or the ability to come up with lots of ideas for how to solve or fix something, children appear to be better at that than older children and adults. So I think because they're not constrained by what they think they should be coming up with or ideas that have already been done before, they're able to just kind of freely think and come up with lots of different ideas or ways of being able to do things. They're better at that divergent piece. And some people assert that this is, partly due to the fact that children also haven't learned to worry about making mistakes. They're not afraid to throw ideas out there because they're not worried that they're going to be wrong or that someone's going to tell them that they've given an answer or an idea that's incorrect. To the right, you can see examples of the 3 stages of creativity. First, children explore the properties of color, how they mix and create new colors. Next, the sand painting example is where preschoolers spend much of their time creating art that doesn't necessarily look like anything. Adults often call this abstract art. Finally, in the later preschool period, children begin to create recognizable figures and forms, like the bird picture. In addition to the general stages of creativity described on the previous page, which can honestly be any age, generally younger children tend to do the lower level stages and older children do the higher level stages, but truthfully, everybody who is learning a new skill starts with the earlier stage of creativity and then works their way up to being able to create something representational. But there are also more specific creativity skills that we're looking for when we think about young children. So you can see here that we're not including 36 months. The infant toddler learning foundations do not include creative endeavors or creative milestones. So here we're just going to be looking at 4 and 5-year-olds. But in terms of more specific creativity skills related to 4 and 5-year-olds, you can see that 4-year-olds can do some of that representational art and they can put a name to it. They may be creating vocal and instrumental kinds of products, using instruments and using their voice as an instrument. They like to add props and costumes when they're acting out stories and engaging in fantasy play with their peers. By 5, they're doing much more intentional creation of works of art, so they're much more engaged in that representational activity. They're also exploring and improvising, and creating brief melodies, so not just playing around with their voices and with instruments, but actually creating melodic compositions with their voice and instruments. They're also going to be using an increasing variety of props, costumes, and scenery to enhance their dramatic play. Typically, children in early elementary school are very creative. They have the fine motor skills, the cognitive skills, the problem-solving skills. They know a tremendous amount about the world around them. They've had practice using their creativity in various domains, and so they tend to be highly creative little people. They can problem solve things that they would like to be creative about. They love fantasy play. They are beginning to be able to play instruments because they can use those fine motor skills and follow instructions. They do tend to be highly realistic, so they like very realistic pretend play. They want their props to be, they will make a prop that looks exactly like the real thing as much as they can. They want costumes that look real. They spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to generate the realism that they see in the world around them, and they have the skills and abilities to be able to do so. One thing that does kind of hinder school-age kids' creative endeavors is that they are both developmentally becoming more aware of what others can do and what their own limitations might be, and they're also becoming aware of societal expectations. This is also timed with going to traditional elementary school, where social comparison and
having your skills be examined and evaluated on a regular basis are kind of part of the landscape of an elementary school age child's life. So you take that developmental need of social comparison and you combine that with the reality of the spaces that they exist in with school, where social comparison is a heavy part of what is happening. And sometimes kids have a reduction in their creativity because they might be uncomfortable being creative. They might be comparing themselves to someone else. They may feel like their skills don't match up and therefore they're not willing to engage in creativity in the way that they were before. But luckily this doesn't happen, with all kids, and it's kind of a slow drop in creativity until around age 8, and then things start to pick. But there is kind of a slump in that middle childhood period.
So one very popular aspect of creativity is children's art or drawing skills. So I did want to give you some additional information about what we might expect children's drawing skills to look like over the period of early childhood. So on this slide and the next 2 slides, you'll be provided with some information that show you what we might be looking for specifically in the drawing arena. So again, we're just focusing on 4 and 5-year-olds for the developmental milestones from the preschool learning foundations on this slide. So you can see at 4, children should be able to draw figures or objects. So again, that representational piece. They should be able to use straight and curved marks and lines, drawing circle shapes, creating paintings or drawings that suggest people, animals, and objects. When they get to age 5, they have more control of these kinds of things. So we should see detailed objects, so not just drawing figures and objects, but using more detail in those pictures, using circles and adding lines to them to create people and animals and other kinds of things, and then being able to do paintings and drawings that not just suggest, but that are pretty good representations of the people and animals and objects that children are trying to create.
So in middle childhood, kids' drawing skills are improving. So on the next couple slides, you're going to see some information specifically related to what children's drawings look like. The slide after this one is probably the most relevant because it has stages of older children and what their drawings look like. The slide after that is about the different shape abilities that children acquire earlier that help them in this 6 to 8 period. So by the children are 6 to 8, they should have mastered all the basic shapes, which allow them to create very detailed drawings. And as we noted on the slide related to creativity skills for this age group, not specifically drawing, but just creativity skills, they really do like realism. So they want to employ that in their drawings as well, draw things as realistically as they can, and they have the motor skills, the knowledge of shapes, the cognitive skills to be able to plan out what they want to draw and to be able to execute that. So they tend to focus their drawings on things that they like and enjoy and know about. They also start using all the cool art skills like having ground underneath the things that they're drawing. So objects are not just floating in thin air anymore, they're actually on the ground, on the grass. They're getting better at proportions and spatial awareness, so knowing where things should go on the page, knowing what size things should be in relation to other things on their page. So their drawing skills become much more sophisticated between the ages of 6 and 8 and then continue on from there.
I wanted to share this screen on the drawing development of young children milestones that we can expect, because this is a very popular one. You'll often see this depiction of drawing skills by Lowenfeld and Edwards, so I wanted to include this for you so you can see that we're moving from kind of scribbles to not very detailed representational drawing at age 3 to a much more detailed representational drawing at age 4. You can see that's where they talk about the X-ray drawing, so you can actually see through the person's clothes to the person underneath. And then we're getting into a lot more detail as we go along and a lot more realism. So this can kind of help you to see not just the preschool years, but where children's drawing skills head off from. And then finally on this slide, I just wanted to show you how drawing progresses, so how children take basic shapes and lines and start using them and incorporating them to create things that we're familiar with across time. So you can see that at the beginning it's swirls and circles and lines and dots, and then those start to get combined with each other so that we have crosses and stars and closed circles and things like that. And then those translate into suns, and then those suns turn into faces, and then those sun faces get legs and arms, and then eventually children add in a torso, bodies, and then we include those things all together. So just so you can see that that basic circle shape with the lines emanating out from it is sort of the beginning of everything after that in terms of the representational drawings that children are able to create. And finally, on the last slide, I wanted to talk about how we can promote creative development for children. And I would encourage you to also look at the chapter in your textbook, because the textbook does an excellent job in talking about how we can facilitate development in different developmental domains for children. So one way to inspire and enhance creative development is to just give children a lot of time. Let them get deep down into their play. The best stuff comes when we have time and opportunity to think and grow and develop. Provide lots of expressive and art materials, creative play kinds of materials. So make sure that children have ample opportunity to explore music and to explore art and to explore dramatic play and all of the things that are good kinds of products for fueling creativity. Make sure that you're allowing children the opportunity to explore materials rather than having to produce some sort of product. I know that we all like those cute holiday kinds of craft activities where, you know, every child walks out the door with a flower for Mother's Day or a tie art for Father's Day, but that doesn't really give children the opportunity to just explore materials and create what they want. So as much as you can, provide children with open-ended activities that allow children to just fully experience the process of something without worrying so much about what the end result is going to be. Put creativity materials in every area of the classroom. So put them in the block play area and in the puzzle area and in the literacy area. Really make creativity part of the landscape of the entire classroom. Make sure that the environments that children have access to are beautiful and aesthetically pleasing. The pictures that I provided to the right of this slide, to me, are great examples of aesthetically pleasing places. So it's not just playing outdoors, but it's in nature with green grass and trees and rocks and natural things, and it just looks like a wonderful place to be. Or the classroom at the bottom right of the slide, the plants and the wood and the natural light and the beautiful things to look at. When we're in beautiful spaces, it helps us to create beautiful things and use our imagination. And then also, in thinking back to the Gopnik and Land videos that I had you watch, so those TED Talks that I asked you to watch on how creative young children are, that also gives you some food for thought about how important it is to limit direct instruction and early academics. They're just not really that good for kids. They don't get that many academic benefits from them, and they lose a lot of social, emotional, and creative developmental benefits by pushing them to do things too early in their educational careers.